This man here is Hector, a villager who lived, excuse the redundancy, in a village, whatever. Hector was in said village when some magical beasts began to attack them. There, all at once, all the adults tell Hector, "Let's see, daddies, grab all your hair and take it up the mountain so that they don't end up being dinner for these beasts," while they, well, tried to stop the magical beasts as much as they could. Being nothing more, the protagonist and the little guys begin to make a scary crawl up the hill to hide in a cave that was there. But what's the matter? Halfway there, a giant demonic Scolopendra appears, which first eats one of the children, this little guy here. Bad luck for him. And, let's see, things didn't look very good for the rest of the people either, but precisely at that time, this other little guy here decides to sacrifice himself so that the protagonist and this little guy, who, by the way, was half a foot in the grave with an illness, nor his mother's son, could escape. And, let's see, the sacrifice of the child debatably works. That is, more or less, since yes, the protagonist and the girl managed to escape, but as I told you, that girl was more dead than alive, so they end up kicking there on the hill. Once it seems that things were calmer, the protagonist goes down to the village to see, how all this had turned out. And, of course, when he arrives, he sees that the village was basically all in shit, and the magical beasts basically had an all-you-can-eat buffet with all the villagers there. Later, this man from here appears, called. And who the hell is it? You will ask yourself. And, well, to answer that, you have to know how this world is structured, which is quite easy to understand, curiously. In this world, there are two kingdoms as such, the Kingdom of Light, which is commanded by Iris, this old woman here, called the Queen of Light, and said kingdom is all clean, all pretty, pure light, good vibes, and all that stuff. Of course, also with an element of religiosity, as if it were, I don't know, the Vatican or something like that, but without touching children, obviously. And the thing is that those people who live in the Kingdom of Light, well, basically, they have a pretty good quality of life, so to speak. While on the other side is the Realm of Darkness. The Kingdom of Darkness is commanded by the King of Darkness. And, well, said king would be this thing here, which doesn't have much shape, so to speak. I think this can't even be classified as a person. Anyway, this kingdom is the complete opposite of the Kingdom of Light, as I told you before. It's dirty, it's cloudy, and dark all day, with serious security problems, and basically a horrible place to live. Although yes, something else to mention is that the two kingdoms are at war. That is because the Kingdom of Light has this thing here called the Progenitor Rune, a rune from which Iris, you know, the Queen of Light. And I think that, in general, all magicians of light draw their power. Although I'm not so sure about magicians getting their power from there, but I would say that's the case. But, well, anyway, the point is that the King of Darkness wants to get hold of the Progenitor Rune, and it is for that reason that he is constantly sending his troops to the Kingdom of Light, you know, to give the little lights a trip and steal their magic stone. With all this context now, who the hell is he? Well, this guy is someone belonging to the nobility of the Kingdom of Darkness, who at some point was a candidate to be the next King of Darkness. But, as you can tell, the guy is not the King of Darkness, so obviously he lost in a very miserable way. The point is that he was taking a walk there when he met Hector, digging a ditch to bury all the people in the village who had passed away. From what the protagonist sees, he realizes that he was quite weak and malnourished, so he gave him some bread and water so that he wouldn't kick his ass like the rest of the people, who wasn't that far from that, to be honest. After that, the protagonist starts talking to him. The point is that, already being there, the reader asks him, if this king does not belong to the King of Darkness, why is he so bad with the people of his lands and acts as if he sucked an egg from them? What's wrong with these people? I mean, literally, they just massacred a lot of people here, and that's not even the bad thing. It turns out that Hector's village was one of several villages that those beasts come ravaging, but the King of Darkness absolutely sucks the shit out of him. There he tells him that, well, the truth is that he doesn't know why the current king acts that way, but definitely everything that appears does it for some reason, to which the protagonist responds that the reason must be that the current king is a tremendous asshole, and I support the protagonist's idea. The truth is that I think the same. After that, the protagonist continues digging, and there he also comments to him that this war between the Kingdom of Light and the Kingdom of Darkness seems extremely stupid to him. He tells him that at the end of the day, we are all equal, and that there should not be such stupid segregation between the people at the top and the people at the bottom. There, he throws a sword at the protagonist and tells him, let's see, daddy, if you want things to change so much, let's see if you have what it takes, or if it's just blah blah blah. And that's it, the metal sword attacks begin. Not bad to think about that part. The point is that that little fight they had between the two of them was more than anything a test than what he had put on the protagonist. And, you see, it seems that his ideals go very much hand in hand with the ideals that the protagonist has. But, of course, he tried to be the King of Darkness to change that world, how its people lived and the relationship they had with the Kingdom of Heaven, but obviously he failed and did not manage to become the king. As such, he failed. But now this man sees in the protagonist a new hope for things to change even a little, and that is why he challenges him in the first place, to see if the protagonist had the wood to overthrow the current King of Darkness. And, let's see, the protagonist will not be able to have loved ones alive, decent work, a roof under which to sleep, or proper nutrition. But what this little guy has plenty of is the desire to beat the current King of Darkness to improve the world where he was born as much as possible. After seeing that, he can die in peace. Because yes, the reason this man was traveling the world was because he was looking for a worthy successor, and since he found one man, he can die peacefully and go with St. Peter. But, yes, before leaving for the other neighborhood, he tells Hector to take his sword and get to his mansion in the capital. The point is that, as I told you, he is a noble, and anyone who possesses his sword automatically becomes the leader of his noble house. Aside from that, he also tells the one who has to tell Valus, who is his right-hand man, this guy here, that he is the current Prince of Darkness, and that he seeks to be the successor of the King of Darkness. You know, so they can put him in that contest to see if he wins the prize of being the King of Darkness and can fix all this shit that the Kingdom of Darkness is doing to you. Being nothing more, he kicks the bucket, and there it also seems that the protagonist awakens his powers, or I don't know if he transfers them to him. I'm not really sure what happened in that part. But, well, now moving on to the Sky People, this is Iris. You know, I have already told you several times, she is the Queen of Light, who, along with her people, repeatedly fights against the troops of the King of Darkness, yes, because you know the latter wants to steal the progenitor rune from the Kingdom of Light to dominate the entire world, and blah 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 blah. The typical excuse of all evil bad guys, they want to dominate the world, because, namely, it's simply a fetish they have. The thing is that, apart from the Iris, there are more little characters that are relatively important on the Team Light side. On the one hand, Fabian, the leader of the Knights of the Light team, there was Jaima, the leader of the Magicians of the Light team, and there was Theo, the younger brother of Fabian and the Gem. Once the secondaries of the Light have been presented, it is time to go with the Iris. The thing is that that old woman was mad that the King of Darkness was going around screwing around day in and day out with the Barako talking about stealing the progenitor rune, which is why she really wanted to put her mother's son to sleep like a puppy. But, at the same time, I felt that the reality was very different. The issue is that it seems that with each passing day, the King of Darkness was getting stronger and stronger, while the Iris was getting more and more tired, since she used too much power from the progenitor rune. And the truth is that this old woman at that point didn't know how much more her body could take. And what's more, up to that point, Iris was wondering if she really, if using all the power of the progenitor or rune, even if she died, she could face the King of Darkness. That is, she didn't even know under those conditions if that guy could beat her. Meanwhile, in the world of darkness, the reader went through the capital looking for the Scarret's mansion. When in those moments the Valus sees him, and at first Saman thinks no, that surely the protagonist stole the Scarret's sword, pointed it at him and told him, "Let's see, old man, pass that sword if you don't want me to make a signature on your chest." But there the reader explains to the Valus that no, he didn't do anything bad to him. He simply turned his back on him, but since he was old, he kicked the bucket. But before that, he made him his disciple so that he would become the next King of Darkness, so that the people of that world would finally have human rights. There, the protagonist also tells Valus that he wanted to sign up for that contest to be the next King of Darkness. And that's how Shireneko Project Zero Chronicle begins, condensed into a couple of microseconds. Before continuing, I want to thank Iskaten for supporting the channel with that super thank you, and if you also want to support what I do, you can like the video, subscribe to the channel, and if you comment on the word, I'll give you a heart, presumably. If nothing else, continue with the video. The thing is that there were the Iris and the Gem making scary chatter in the room where the progenitor rune is, the magical crystal that gives power to that old woman, when in those they told Laris that a part of the kingdom was being attacked. So, while Fabian gathers his knights and the Gem gathers his magicians to go and get his hands on that situation, Laris is going to fly to the part that was being attacked in the capital to now see what the hell the evil Dark King was messing with. But well, curiously, this time the situation had nothing to do with the Dark King, but that doesn't mean that the guy is a bore. The thing is that the person who was doing the damage in the capital was this giant furrow here, super, hyper, mega, ultra, very powerful. And this son of his erratic mother has nothing to do with anything. That is, he starts destroying the city for the mere pleasure of it, and what he finds is a small group of magicians who were half trying to confront him, and they weren't even trying to confront him. They were half trying to confront him, they were barely trying. Well, the furrow has nothing to do with anything, and come here, he ends up killing them with a great goal. And let's see. Something good that I have to admit to this Sekai is that at least they are not afraid of killing people. I mean, the rest of the aspects of this work, man, I'm not critical, but I have to say that they leave a lot to be desired, but at least, in terms of deaths, they do a good job. Anyway, more reinforcements arrive to try to put that tired Barako to sleep, but the person who stands out by far the most among those reinforcements is this little blonde here, who is one of the best magicians in the kingdom. He uses 3 elemental spirits to try to beat up the giant furrow. But no, the giant furrow is very broken. The point is that that furry Barako kills the 3 spirits. If that is possible, I'm not very sure if a spirit can die. Anyway, it beats them. That is, it doesn't even beat its mother's son. But what is certain is that the furrow had serious homicidal intentions towards the blonde, but in those cases the iris comes to save the day, or, well, the night in this case. The thing is that the iris itself was already clogged because, imagine, he was already going to sleep, he had already put on his pajamas, he had a glass of hot milk and some cookies, and now, out of nowhere, he had to go fight a giant furrow. But what's more, this old woman ends up seeing the corpses of the magicians that the furrow sent to a better life, which is why she goes all out with everything she has to give the furrow Barako a floor. But, of course, although the initiative to attack the Kingdom of Light was completely Val's initiative, let's say the giant furrow, since this thing acts as an independent entity and is the representation of chaos, obviously the Dark King cannot miss the opportunity to also attack the Kingdom of Light and cause even more damage. And yes, the Lord of Darkness, this son of his blessed mother, it is not that he does not send monsters or regular troops, because he surely did not have them prepared, but that the son of his blessed mother sends peasants who had absolutely nothing to do with it. I mean, at first, these guys didn't even want to fight, because normally they are farmers, not warriors. Their job is to grow potatoes, not to hit other people in the face. The issue is that, in view of their refusal, that these seas did not want to fight with the people of the light, the Dark King ends up cursing them so that they become some kind of, I don't know, zombies with the order to fight, and, well, Fabian and his people end up taking them down. On the Iris side, this one attacks with everything it can, but what's the matter? The giant liner is not just stupidly powerful, but this one is also stupidly resistant. That is, none of his attacks did anything to the furrow. In one of those, the Iris thinks about using even more power from the progenitor rune than she was using at the time, which, I tell you, was quite a lot of power, but in the end she doesn't do it, since that could end horribly wrong, like with her dead or, in the worst case, a magical Oppenheimer. So, hey, for whatever reason, better avoid catastrophes. That situation half lowered the giant furrow's desire to fight, so he ended up retreating there, but anyway, the damage has already been done. In the end, a large part of the city is left in ruins along with a lot of refugees, wounded and dead. Meanwhile, in the Kingdom of Darkness, there is this Albalus waiting for the King of Darkness to return to the throne room when this green man arrives here. Turns out it's being a commander. The thing is, do you remember that all the time they send dark troops to invade the Kingdom of Light? Well, it turns out that the troops they command are the troops of this man, this poor asshole. And of course, Colin on steroids was already mad about the king using his troops as cannon fodder and that those people were basically going to die in the Kingdom of Light. So he was waiting for the King of Darkness to tell him the 40 and ask him to stop doing his stupid things of sending his people to die. But of course, we are talking about the King of Darkness, the man who ordered dozens of innocent peasants to be killed the night before to get absolutely nothing. Nothing. He simply lost manpower to the stupid man, he got nothing. And, of course, this goblin on steroids thinks that this guy thinks well and is going to come to his senses. Yes, of course. It is obvious that the King of Darkness was not going to listen to the goblin, so to avoid any inconvenience, as soon as he reaches the throne room, he kills him and that's it. He no longer has to deal with him. I mean, fucking asshole, it was simply that they killed him. Already there, the king confesses to Valus that the reason he does everything he does is because for him the Kingdom of Light should not exist. The two kingdoms should be plunged into darkness, the whole world should be under their darkness. Yes, what I told you before, this is a mean bad guy who just wants to take over the world. Look, I'm very bad. There, Valus wanted to send that guy to eat shit. But, of course, given what we've seen, he can't do it. So obviously he says no, yes, yes, and I very much agree with you. Brother, you are a genius. In fact, I think exactly the same. Everyone should be under their darkness. It is not at all a bad idea that everyone loses human rights, not simply the people below, but also the people in the sky. Obviously, it's fine for everyone to eat dirt. Yes, yours is a great plan, sir. But even after that, after giving him complete reason, Valis tries to fix things a little, telling that man that, let's see. Yes, I mean, he has a great point in his head, but maybe sending stupid people to die in heaven is not the best of ideas. To which the King of Darkness responds to Valis, son, he sucks my egg. In fact, he sucks both of me. That is, I am the boss of this ranch. As long as I remain the boss of this ranch, what I say will be done on this ranch because I am the boss of this ranch. Well, the King of Darkness, what can you expect from that guy? Anyway, the reason why that man sent for the Valis is more than anything so that he could lend a hand with the giant furrow that destroys worlds. Since, as I told you before, that man is an independent entity, he is the living representation of chaos. And what does that mean? Well, the giant furrow simply wants to see the world burn, and absolutely nothing. This guy has no ideas about, I don't know, geopolitical strategy, domination, or anything like that. This guy just wants to watch the world burn and little else. And, well, that's why he needs help from the Valius, because this guy is an independent entity, and that means it's only a matter of time before the furrow comes to the Kingdom of Darkness and wants to fuck it up, just like he did with the Kingdom of Light. Another interesting thing is that you know that in that kingdom, the question of being king is not fixed, but you are the king until one of the aspirants is stronger and has more merits than the current king. Well, it turns out that the Dark King's mastermind wants to plunge everything into darkness, basically, to have total control over the world so he can be a dictator and reign for eternity. I mean, yeah, reaffirm my point, the King of Darkness is a mean bad guy who just wants world domination. Because? Because it came out of the egg. And of course, Valis, upon finding out about this, gets a little angry, since yes, despite serving the king, he also serves the protagonist. And obviously, Valis wants Hector to be the next Dark King, because he knows the current king sucks. Anyway, Valis doesn't know how things will evolve in the future, the only thing he can do now is train the protagonist as best he can, so that's what he does. So he makes him study, he also teaches him how to throw swords, but he also teaches him to live with people so that in the future he does not become a tyrant king like the current one. But anyway, now we're going with Grossa, this old lady here. And who is Grossa? You will ask yourself. And, well, this here is a princess of the kingdom, who was on her way to the capital to talk to the protagonist. But since she still had a long way to go, this old woman says, "Hey guys, let's stop here. Let's get a little air and let's rest for a while. Then we continue on our way." The issue is that those 3 wild beasts attack them, but of course, since the big guy is a big guy, joke, one of the Reezy beasts gets off. The issue is that one of the beasts attacks her by surprise, but it just so happens that the protagonist was in the area and sends the beast to another neighborhood. Once there, the Grossa thanks the protagonist for the help, and while he's at it, these two introduce themselves, and after that, the protagonist was going to return to the little house, but at that point, the Grossa stops him, since she had things to talk to him about. So she takes him to a bar, and what the hell did that old woman have to do with Hector? You will ask yourself. And, well, it turns out that apparently the protagonist was not an aspiring to be the next king, or, well, at least he was not yet. So that's why the girl had to talk to him to formalize his participation as a candidate. And that was it. It was just paperwork. As for Iris, well, there was the poor thing sitting on the throne on the verge of a nervous breakdown. Because you know, the Dark King is getting heavier and heavier, invading her ranch, her body is holding less and less power from the progenitor rune, and to make matters worse, now there is a giant psychopathic furrow who wants to end the world and who has already destroyed half her ranch. So man, it's normal that the poor thing is on the verge of a nervous breakdown. I mean, it would have already happened to me. But anyway, whatever. There is the gem to talk about the reconstruction of the destroyed part of the city and, well, the Iris gives him the go-ahead. Says, okay. After that, we get a little flashback to how things were before, which is that, interestingly, in the Kingdom of Light, just like in the Kingdom of Darkness, the successor to the throne, well, is by inheritance, but is chosen. In the case of the Kingdom of Light, who decides who will be the next Queen of Light is the progenitor rune itself. And a while ago, there were 2 top candidates to occupy that position. On the one hand, there was the Iris, and on the other, there was the gem. But, of course, obviously Iris was the one chosen to be the Queen of Light, because she is the current Queen of Light and she is not a gem. Anyway, while we're at it, in that flashback they also show us several important things. First, like Fabian and Theo are also brothers of the gem, which I think I had already said, but I reaffirm just in case. And, in general, these three are quite united with the Iris. She's like the fourth sister, more or less. Well, that's on the side of Theo and the gem. Fabian did have a lot of desire for the Iris. There they also show us the first time that the Iris, already the queen, dispelled an attack from the Dark King. Say this little girl here. This whole situation helps us understand what the objective of the Iris is. And, you see, as you can imagine, in the Kingdom of Light there is a hell of xenophobia. And, let's see, it's not because I'm a devil's advocate, but the fact that the Dark King goes around attacking those who belong to the light all the time, man, doesn't help much to improve the image they have of the Kingdom of Darkness. But now, Laris as such does not fear or hate those people. What she wants is to have a good diplomatic relationship with the Kingdom of Darkness and for there to be, well, balance between the kingdoms. But anyway, I already missed the flashback a lot. We return to the protagonist. And, let's see, as we saw previously, the protagonist and I had registered him so that he could represent the house of as an aspiring to be the next King of Darkness. Being no more, Hector goes to the Colosseum, and there Lagrosa tells the applicants that they would have to fight some beasts. And, of course, that test will not end until they finish off all the beasts, but until there are simply 2 applicants standing. After that phase, the 2 candidates will go to a grand final, where they will face each other 1 versus 1. Whoever wins that good fight will win Kuro's sword, say this sword here, which automatically makes him the successor of the current King of Darkness. Not being any more, they begin to clash with the beasts, and first of all the applicants were beating said beasts very badly, except for this magician here, who fails to burn the beast she wanted. And, well, that kind of ruins the beast, and now he was going after this old woman to give her a floor, but then the Toad's protagonist falls to save her. And, of course, the rest of the people get very upset and ask him, "Hey, what the hell are you doing? It's supposed to be eliminated, not saved. You're an idiot, or what's wrong with you?" Although, anyway, the protagonist ends up saving her, but that doesn't help him much either, since a magical beast much bigger and stronger than the rest enters. And although in the end the protagonist ends up sending the beast to another neighborhood, before that, it ends up disqualifying the majority of applicants. So there was only the protagonist left, Adele, this redhead here, and there was also another random cosplaying as a ninja, but Adele ends up giving him a little incentive to leave the competition. And well, the ninja ends up leaving the competition. Who knew? After that, there is a break while they prepared the arena for the grand finale. There, the Adele asks the protagonist again, "You, why the hell did you help that random?" And he responds that, well, what was so strange about it? That is, literally, he did the same thing at the end of the competition, he saved him from the stab that the ninja was going to give him, but he replied that no, he did not do it to help him, but he did it because he wanted to hit him with his sword in the grand final. So the Adele asks the protagonist again, "Aha, why is he helping that old woman?" To which the protagonist responds that, well, he ended up helping that old woman because, I don't know, the protagonist doesn't really like that story of seeing how an innocent person dies at the hands of a magical beast in a horrible and incredibly painful, explicit way. The thing is that answer doesn't convince Aladel either because, little brother, do they really believe in human rights in Big 26? Because of course, it's not like a lot of people support and encourage a genocide that's happening right now in the Middle East, right? As it is done, the break is over, and now we go to the grand final, Hector versus Adele. As the combat begins, those two begin to swing swords at each other, but quite hard, until in one of these, the protagonist manages to disarm Adele, and the protagonist is in a position to kill him, but does not do so. There, Aladel asks him why the hell he doesn't kill him, and he tells him that, "Let's see, son, having heard, I already answered this. I do believe in human rights, and it's not that I love seeing innocent people dead either." There, Aladel, seeing that the protagonist was not going to give him ground, goes to look for his sword to continue fighting. But nothing, Dad. The protagonist leaves him in check again, because there, Aladel cannot do anything else, so he ends up giving up, which leaves the protagonist as the winner and possessor of Kuro's sword. Say that now the protagonist is the Prince of Darkness and direct successor to the King of Darkness. Although, yes, there is something to keep in mind, and that is that, although the protagonist is the direct successor, if it happened to Hector, it would be Adele who would become the new direct successor. But anyway, the grand finale has barely finished and they already have a mission for the protagonist and Adele. The point is that they meet the Valis, who tells the couple that the mission they are given is to go to the Kingdom of Darkness to deliver a letter. And being no more, both Elector, Adele, Grossa, and Grossa's assistants leave for the Kingdom of Light. But yes, although Grossa and her people are going on the magical boat towards the Kingdom of Light, they are not going to stay in the Kingdom of Light, they will return immediately. Those who are going to stay a few days in said kingdom are simply the protagonist and the Adele. Another thing is that apparently the protagonist and the Adele are now friends. Did the protagonist's sword blows change the Adele's mind? We will never know that, but what we do know is that now these two get along wonderfully. While they are traveling, Adele tells the protagonist that, although Hector was the Prince of Darkness, on that occasion it was better that he not say that he omit that information. And let's say that Hector is not very talkative, and taking into account that Team Light and Team Darkness are in the middle of a war, it is better that he is the one who speaks to the people of Light to avoid misunderstandings that could end, in a relationship between the kingdoms worse than the one they currently have, if that is possible. Or, well, in the worst individual case, that the two of them end up executing them. So, just in case, it's better to watch. The protagonist simply acts as a bodyguard who helps Adele, and Adele simply acts as another messenger. In the end, the protagonist accepts Adele's idea, and after that, they arrive at a port where they disembark. They meet some knights and Fabian himself, who threatens them with a sword. The protagonist is not fooling around and says, "Let's see, yes, very macho. If you want to give him a sword, I'll give you a sword too, you bad boy." But in those, he tells her, hey, endure the trip. Do you want this thing to get worse or what? Shut up, don't draw your sword. The issue is that Fabian does not want to let the couple pass, for obvious reasons. But in those, he tells him no, that they come in peace and they do not want to fight or anything like that. They are simply acting as messengers and just want to deliver that letter to the Iris. As expected, Fabian continued to distrust these people, and what's more, he even takes the opportunity to blame them for being at war because of them, to which Adele responds that, although it is true, that is, it was the Kingdom of Darkness that started the conflicts, they do not do it for pleasure, that is, the King of Darkness is crazy. But he is still their king, so they have to obey him, whether they like it or not. Not so much because of a feeling of patriotism, love for their land and their leaders, or some nonsense like that, but because they, such, do not have a progenitor rune like the Kingdom of Light has. Instead, it is the King of Darkness himself who becomes his equivalent to the progenitor rune, but for the Dark Ones. And what does all this mean? You will ask. Well, basically, the King of Darkness is stupidly broken and no one can oppose him because they are lowered by 1. I mean, a perfect example of this was what happened with that poor goblin on steroids, who simply went to beg not to kill his troops. I mean, he screwed it up again in a second. There, His tells Fabian that they are actually allies, but that, for the moment, the only thing they can do is hold out until the current King of Darkness's mandate ends and pray that the next one isn't a fucking crazy person who wants, I don't know, to see the world burn and be in constant conflict. In the end, Adele ends up convincing Fabian, so he gives the letter to Laris, and immediately afterwards, Laris sends them to call. Tell the couple, the protagonist, and Laris. Once they are gathered there, Laris tells Laris that yes, he understands that the giant lining aims to destroy both kingdoms simply because of its whim, and that the kingdoms would join forces, as the letter that the King of Darkness sent to Laris says is not such a crazy idea. But of course, there is a small detail, and that is that as soon as they send the giant lining for the Isekai, the King of Darkness will attack again with everything the Kingdom of Light has. But of course, the protagonist, upon hearing that, says that this war will simply remain as long as the current king remains on the throne. There, he follows Hector's point and tells Laris that, indeed, it seems that the current king intends to retire, and as soon as another king touches the throne of that kingdom, the war will cease completely. I guess that's why they did that whole tournament thing, to get the next heir to the throne. Anyway, doesn't this old beard here totally agree that the Dark King is waiting to give up the throne? And if that was his idea, why the hell is he so busy attacking the Kingdom of Light? I mean, it doesn't make sense. Anyway, Laris responds to Ladith that this situation is a bit complex to decide what to do at that moment, so she tells the couple that, well, she will let them know her answer when she decides what to do. After that, Fabian took the couple to a room so they could spend the night there. The point is that the reader ended up liking the Iris, so since he is there, he asks Fabian, hey, and how is the Iris there? What is this old woman like? And this one, well, Fabian tells him to go to hell. First, because they are enemies, and second, because Fabian is also in love with Iris, so obviously he does not plan to cooperate with a possible relationship that these two had, which is highly unlikely, but be careful, not impossible. And the next day, the Iris calls the couple, but they still had doubts, so they directly asked the protagonist, who was posing as a bodyguard and nothing more, what is happening with Kuro's people? I mean, not in general, but with respect to the giant furrow, to which, well, every time that giant furrow appears, a lot of innocent people die. But with an alliance between the kingdoms to give a foothold to that furrow, many lives would be saved. And of course, after hearing that, Laris decides to formalize the alliance between the kingdoms. It is for that reason that the next day the Iris flies off towards the Kingdom of Darkness, to help give ground to that giant furry. But yes, something to mention is that although technically the kingdoms are under ceasefire while they put an end to the furrow, the guarantee that the Kingdom of Light has that the Dark King complies with said truce are the protagonist and Adele. That is, those two are hostages. And since the King of Darkness decides to attack the Kingdom of Light in the middle of the truce, well, the Kingdom of Light will send the couple to a better life. And that is also precisely the reason why Fabian does not accompany Laris to the Kingdom of Darkness to keep an eye on Hector and Aladel. Returning to Laris as she reaches the Realm of Darkness, she also reaches the giant furrow. I mean, it even seems like the fucking furrow is waiting for him to attack. But, well, whatever. The people of Darkness were already prepared for the arrival of the furrow, so as this man approaches, Lagrosa is left in charge of all the artillery while the Valis goes out to fight the giant furrow hand-to-hand, along with several of its magical beasts. And, well, the Valis' attacks, well, they didn't really tickle the furrow, while with just half a blow, the furrow could kill dozens of magical beasts at once. And yes, what do you want me to tell you? Things were looking pretty bad for the Dark Tima. Lagrosa, for her part, was also trying to attack the giant furrow with that little weapon here, which I assume must be a legendary, super powerful weapon or something like that. But whatever, it doesn't manage to harm the furrow either. Rather, after that shot, the average furrow who fights with the big one, what if it doesn't jump off the wall? In other words, the furrow turned her into a human skewer, practically. After that, the Valis sends one of his magical beasts simply to distract while other magical beasts cast a powerful spell, but what goes? That doesn't work either. The furrow kills all magical beasts. Seeing that going from group to group they were not going to achieve anything, they decide to attack all at the same time in a mega combined attack together with the power of friendship, which ends in absolutely nothing. The fucking furrow cannot be damaged by any attack. Already desperate, the Valis attacks the furrow again hand-to-hand and again achieves absolutely nothing. What's more, in those, the furrow stuns both the Valis and the Grossa, and was already charging ulti to send the couple to a better life. When in those, the Dark King teleports the couple and goes himself to confront the giant furry who only wants to see the world burn, this being the first time, probably, that the King of Darkness helps someone. I mean, crazy. The guy cared about his troops. Miracle, it seems to be changing. Spoiler, no, he is not changing. He simply did, because otherwise his entire army would be in worse condition. Once there, the Dark King expands his domain and begins to attack the giant furrow. And although it was clear that the Dark King was stronger than the Valis and the Grossa, the Furrow Barako was still intact. But of course, let's remember that the King of Darkness had made an alliance with Iris, so at that same moment Iris enters the domain of the Dark King, uses her power to seal him momentarily, to later seal him, now for real, in Tartarus, and makes the maximum security prison that the King of Darkness has. But that time the seal, well, as I told you, was permanent. Or, well, until something extraordinary happened. Once the giant furrow is out of the equation, the Iris is left face to face with the King of Darkness. And of course, there this old woman gets a tremendous desire to embarrass the King of Darkness, but what's going on? Since first they were in a truce, and second she was exhausted by all the power she used to seal the giant lining, she decided to return home, the Kingdom of Light. Meanwhile, well, Hector and his were in the palace talking with Gaima and Fabian. Hector sees how Iris was flying back, but she was staggering, so he runs away so that this old woman doesn't hit the ground. After that, the rest of the people arrive and take Iris to her room to recover. The issue is that, as I told you before, Iris's body was already suffering before from repeatedly using the power of the progenitor rune, but thanks to this, added to the large amount of power she used in her fight against the giant furrow, she was much worse. Let's see, he wasn't on the verge of death, but if things continued like this, it would only be a matter of time before he was. Meanwhile, in the Kingdom of Darkness, there La Grossa goes home, when Valis appears, basically giving him this other letter from here to the Kingdom of Light. And, of course, that old woman loved the idea since, apparently, in the, I don't know, 4 or 5 days that she has been knowing Hector, she is already deeply consumed by the weak. Meanwhile, in the Kingdom of Light, there were Hector and Adele in the throne room talking to Laris, who was being accompanied by Fabian, and, well, there Laris tells Iris that, on behalf of the Kingdom of Darkness, he thanks her for supporting them in stopping the giant furrow. But since Saw also tells him once he returns to the kingdom, he will try to talk to the Dark Scroll. You know, so that he can leave the Kingdom of Light alone once and for all. And of course, when these people hear that, they half worry, because doing that, well, it's basically a suicide sentence. That is, look what happened to the Coblin with asteroids, poor thing. It wasn't his turn. But anyway, if Adele was saying that, more than anything, it was to gain the trust of Iris and Fabian, and let's see, it seems that it worked quite well. Already in the middle of the audience, Grossa arrives at the Kingdom of Light, so they make her go to the throne room, and she gives this letter from the Dark King to Eris. And what the hell did that letter say? You will ask yourself. And, well, curiously, it was a good thing, which is very rare coming from the King of Darkness. The point is that said letter was simply a request to extend the peace pact while the kingdoms recovered from the damage done by the psychopathic furrow. And let's see, it would have been nice of the Dark King to directly send a request for a total cessation of war, but it is obvious that his mother's son is not going to do it. I mean, what a bore that guy is. As expected, Laris accepts the request of the King of Darkness and orders the documents to be filled out for said request to be effective. So, while they wait, Laris takes the people on a tour of the city so they can, well, get to know it. And, see, to be honest, the truth is that nothing like that happens, the thing is super important or something like that. No, that is, if anything, there are 3 little things and nothing more to comment on. First is that Theo, the younger brother of Fabian and the Gem, despite being a child, seems to know a lot about band-aids, and it is only a matter of time before he becomes an army support magician. Something like that. Another thing is that Larry seems to also be starting to have feelings for Hector, to which LaGrossa realizes this and, well, obviously gets jealous because this old woman is also after him. Finally, the last thing to mention is that they change clothes, as a sign of friendship between the kingdoms and little else. That's it. Later they start playing chess, they have dinner, they are in a villa, they decide to go camping the next day to collect wild vegetables and things like that. That being said, the next day the entire girl group goes into the forest to go collect these vegetables. Once he comes out in the center of it, the Adel tells the people that it is not very fun to just pick vegetables like an idiot. No, you have to add seasoning and spice to the matter. So he proposes that to make things more fun, well, that they have fun in pairs, and the pair that collects the most, then that pair would be the one who would win. Of course, hearing that, both LaGrossa and Fabian thought, this is our chance. More than anything, they wanted to take advantage of the situation. Fabian planned to make a move on Iris, while LaGrossa intended to get close to Hector. But that idea didn't last long, as they ultimately decided that to strengthen diplomatic relations between the kingdoms, they should pair up with people from different kingdoms. Meaning, one dark and one light. Yes, they were basically doing an interracial pairing. In the end, the pairs were Hector with Theo, LaGrossa with Fabian, and Gema with Adele. As for Iris, well, she was basically a walking botanical encyclopedia. So, to make things fairer, Iris wouldn't compete. She would simply gather her vegetables on her own and help everyone with how to collect certain vegetables, which ones were poisonous, which were edible, and so on. Or, well, that was the idea. But due to fate, Larry's ended up joining the protagonist's team, which didn't amuse LaGrossa and Fabian one bit. But they couldn't do much about it. After a while, they finished collecting vegetables, and for whatever reason, by sheer fate, Hector's team ended up winning. It definitely had nothing to do with them having the most knowledgeable person about vegetables on their team. That certainly didn't influence anything at all. But anyway, since they collected all those vegetables, Larry's decided to cook a meal with them. So the guys went to gather dry sticks for the fire while the girls went to wash the vegetables at a small lake nearby. At one point, it seemed like Theo got lost. But no, it was a trick. It only served for Hector and Larry's to take a dip in the lake and nothing more. After that, they cooked the vegetables, ate, and in general, things were going wonderfully between the light people and the dark people. But anyway, it seems that in addition to the 2 letters he had sent Iris, the Dark King sent a 3rd letter, but this time not to Iris, but to Adele. The letter seemingly ordered Hector and Adele to return to the Dark Kingdom. So, while these two were saying goodbye to the people in the palace, LaGrossa was on the magic ship receiving some gifts from the light people. You know, as gestures of goodwill between the kingdoms and all that. Anyway, they first said goodbye to Fabian, who had even grown fond of them, especially Adele. But Fabian returned their weapons to the two, as we remember they had been taken from them as soon as they arrived in the Light Kingdom. And before leaving completely, they went to the throne room to say goodbye to Iris, but also to receive Iris's answers to the truce request proposed by the Dark King during the repairs of the destruction left by the giant beast. But, of course, things couldn't continue to be so good. No, the Dark King couldn't be such a good person. It turns out that Adel never changed his mind. He never believed in peace between the kingdoms, unlike the protagonist. He was simply pretending to lower the protagonist's and the Light People's defenses. But the truth is, he still harbored deep hatred for the people of the Light Kingdom, as he believed that because of that kingdom, the Shadow Kingdom was almost in ruins. But anyway, Adel unleashed all his power and tried to finish off Iris, knowing she was weak. But what Adel didn't count on was Hector doing a Gojo-like restraint on him, to stop him from harming Iris. And of course, the situation was terribly awful, and everyone was half in shock by what had just happened. The protagonist took the opportunity to tell Iris that the Dark and Light people weren't really as different as she thought. They simply had no choice but to obey the Dark King. After that, Fabian immediately ran to the protagonist and gave him a thorough beating, immobilized him, and told the guards to take him to the dungeon, saying he would conduct a small interrogation later. Meanwhile, Gima and the old bearded man took Iris to a safe place. As for Lagrosa, she was calmly on the ship when her assistants brought her the gossip that Hector had been captured and Adel had been finished off. These people had no idea what exactly happened, only that. And also that if they didn't leave immediately, they'd end up like the Titanic, which is why they returned to the Dark Kingdom at once. As you can imagine, things in the capital were quite tense. On one hand, there was Fabian, who felt betrayed because he truly trusted Adel, even thinking they were friends. And, of course, he began to think that there could never be a truly peaceful relationship between the Light and Dark Kingdoms. Because if the person from that kingdom he trusted most betrayed him in such a despicable and disgusting way, what could be expected from the rest of the Dark people? On Iris's side, things were a bit different. She was talking to the progenitor Rune, asking why the kingdoms that are supposed to protect peace are always fighting. And the truth is, if things are always going to be like this, she wouldn't want to continue being the Queen of Light. But then the progenitor Rune told Iris, "Sweetie, hold on a second. You're getting confused. You don't always have to be at odds with all the Dark people and hate every single one of them. No, as Queen, you are very independent, and you can decide what to fight for and who to fight for, whether it's for the irrational hatred between the kingdoms or for cooperation. That, my dear, is entirely your decision. You'll see what you do. You're old enough to decide for yourself." Meanwhile, in one of the dungeons of the palace, he was grabbing a sign after the holy whore that Fabian gave him, and he was there all thoughtful when this white cat from here arrives, who opens the door of the dungeon and asks him to follow him, and thanks to said kitten, he manages to escape. Already when he was on the edge of the kingdom, the cat transforms, and it turns out, it happens that all that time the cat was the Iris. The issue is that the Iris detransforms, and the protagonist grabs it so that it doesn't hit the floor, because the Iris is weak from using so much power of the progenitor Rune. The point is that the Iris decided what it is going to fight for, and its response is cooperation. She wants the Kingdom of Light and the Kingdom of Darkness to be brothers and not screw each other. So that's why he freed the protagonist, because he knows that the reader is stupid, and he knows that if they and people like them cooperate, they can make the two kingdoms sooner or later have a peaceful relationship. And of course, the reader in those is like, my old we, because exactly what Laris was saying is the wet dream that the reader has had throughout his erratic life. So obviously he tells Laris that yes, she can count on him, that he thinks the same as her, and that she can count on his support. And there he also tells him that he is not just any Ramdan, but that he is the Prince of Darkness, so he is going to do everything possible to send the father and the current King of Darkness, in order to become the next King of Darkness and declare a total cessation to the war between the kingdoms. But, well, the lovebirds can't stay talking any longer, since the kingdom's guards are almost arriving and Hector, for whatever reason, doesn't want to be given a trip to the afterlife, so he grabs his two swords and says, "Let's get out of here." After that, the Iris continued dispatching magical beasts of darkness, as always, although yes, that old woman continued to weaken as time went by. But, of course, if it is already bad enough that the Iris is getting weaker, it turns out that the King of Darkness increases. Though the problem is that the pressure of his attacks is so much that before the magical beasts did not go beyond the border, but now the Dark King has begun to launch attacks that manage to reach the city, half of the city infested by monsters. Already knowing that, Laris tells Fabian to double the security personnel so that there is, well, more security in the city. And also, if they discover an attack by the Dark King, they immediately notify her so that she can go help the troops. Once there, Fabian asks Laris for a short absence, and you will wonder, hey, why the hell does Fabian want to take a vacation precisely at the time when there are the most demonic attacks? And let's see. The point is that Fabian knew that Iris was feeling ill, so the absence that he asks of her is to go find some way to make Iris recover faster. As expected, the Iris denies Fabian's absence and tells him to continue with his thing, that she is feeling great and it is only a matter of time before she is 100%. Which, obviously, is a lie, but it is not like the Iris could allow herself to lose the person who manages the Knights of the Kingdom precisely at that moment. Although yes, it goes in one ear and out the other for Fabian. He tries to tell the gem that despite what the Iris told him, he was going to go out and find a way to cure that old woman. But the gem tells him to be careful with disobeying the Iris, and that you made so much nonsense, that he is already grown up, and that he can't put up with such nonsense at this critical moment they are going through. This, as expected, also sucks Fabian's egg. That is to say, he sucks one egg of what the Iris told him, so whatever the gem tells him sucks two, or sucks three if he has triorchidism, whatever. And why is Fabian so eager to find something to cure Darius? You will ask yourself. And, well, that's thanks to this elf here who fights with spirits. You know, the same elf that ended up getting smashed by the giant liner. Anyway, there the elf explains to Fabian what is happening with the Iris, and it turns out that in order for it to use the powers of the progenitor rune, it uses spiritual threads through which the rune sends the power. The issue is that these threads wear out, and although they recover naturally, it is a fairly slow process. The thing is that the elf knows a way to repair those threads, use the shiny drops, special drops that, as you can imagine, would repair those threads instantly, which would be wonderful. But there is a small problem, and that is that those drops are in a stupidly dangerous place. Hearing that, Fabian uses the secret technique to convince any man to do the most stupid and dangerous thing possible. He tells the elf, "There are no eggs," to which the elf responds, "What do you mean there are no eggs?" "Eggs are what I have left over, Dad, because I had polyarchism, obviously." So, the next day, the couple immediately goes to look for the shiny drops. And, well, both the Iris and the gem have nothing left to do but wait for that man to return quickly and safely, preferably before the Dark King ruins the entire kingdom. On the reader's side, when he jumps from the realm of light so as not to be caught in the tombs of light, he is trapped by the magical boat. Once he reaches the kingdom of darkness, the protagonist tries to go to the palace of the Dark King. I don't know exactly why I would talk to that man, I don't know. The issue is that they deny him entry, probably because the Dark King knows that it was the protagonist who screwed up the plan to give the Iris a trip to the afterlife. You know, taking advantage of the fact that that old woman was weak. And I imagine that guy won't even want to see it in painting. Anyway, the protagonist continues with his very normal life, but with that feeling that he must help the Iris, but he doesn't know exactly how to do it. The thing is that, in the middle of a training session with Valis, he gives him the little gem that the communication between the Kingdom of Darkness and the Kingdom of Light lasts forever, because the Dark King came out of his eggs, basically. That begins a conversation between the Elector and the Valis, where the Valis tells the protagonist that no, that darkness has always covered that kingdom, and that the king is master and lord of darkness, and therefore all of them have the duty to do what the king orders. That has always been so, and so it will be for eternity. While on the protagonist's side, he was telling him that he was already fed up with that situation, and that things should not be like this, that the whole situation is unfair. But in the end, these two end well, and Values tells the reader that, although he now serves the current king and does things in his name, when he becomes the next king, he will act in the way he tells him to, without question. After that, the Grossa comes running, since supposedly some stupidly powerful magical beasts appeared on the border, so powerful that normal troops would have no chance against them, so he ordered them to give ground to said magical beasts. But what the hell, that was just a tall tale. The issue is that the Dark King was preparing a mega attack to this time get hold of the progenitor rune, and since the king knew that the protagonist was more on the side of the Iris than on his side, he sent him away so he wouldn't screw up so much. The Valis knew this, but still he doesn't say a single word, since, well, whether he likes it or not, he is a servant of the King of Darkness, so he has to listen to him. Although, in the same way, it is not that has much influence, since in the middle of his mission to give shelter to magical beasts, the protagonist sees magical boats heading to the Kingdom of Light, and you don't have to be a genius to know that these boats don't have very good intentions. The issue is that, in those, these two are attacked by some beasts, and Hilagrosa is half careless, so she falls into a ravine that was there. But no problem, let the protagonist rescue him. But precisely in that ravine was this minotaur here, which had all the earmarks of being the magical beast that normal soldiers could not kill. There, at once, the reader runs towards the minotaur with every intention of turning him into a piece of shit. But for what? It seemed that that beast did get the sword blows. Although in the end that doesn't help him much, since the rude power powers Hector's sword, and he ends up giving the killing blow to that little bull. Once their duty has been completed, the couples return home, but there the rude woman tells the protagonist that she received a bluefin tuna, so he wants to invite her to dinner. And, well, since the protagonist didn't have many things to do either, he tells him, well, I like tuna, so come on, I accept your invitation. And once in the Grossa's house, they begin to talk about two relatively important things. And that is that, despite the fact that the protagonist is the heir to the crown of that kingdom, he makes it very clear to the Grossa that upon coming to power, he will send to hell that whole story of wanting to conquer the kingdom of light to assume it in the dark, since for him the deal he made with Laris so that both kingdoms would be in peace is more important than the wanker's delirium. That power of wanting to conquer everything, which apparently all the ancient kings of darkness have always had. The second important thing that happens is that Grossa takes the opportunity to declare it to the protagonist, but he rejects it, since the one he really loves is Aliris. And yes, although La Grossa comes out crying there, she promises to always be on the protagonist's side, so technically she is still a friend. Meanwhile, in the Kingdom of Light, things were going quite a bit. And precisely while that asshole Fabian and that other magical elf were not there, the Dark King sends a mega attack. So, being no more, Laris, together with his magicians, begins to give way to all the people and beasts of the Dark Kingdom. They were fighting, especially with those who came from the border. But, as I told you before, things are not so easy anymore. Even in the middle of the city, darkness appears from where soldiers of the Dark King came out. Although, yes, thanks to the gem and the knights, they managed to slow them down a little, but even so, the attack was quite strong. While this was happening in the capital of the kingdom, Fabian and the elf continued looking for their shiny drops. And, to be honest, Fabian was too much there. I mean, the man didn't do a damn, the elf is the one who finds the entrance to the cave where the shiny drops were hidden. Once inside the cave, they go against a wall, and in that situation, Fabian, instead of looking for solutions, throws a 404 not found error. But in that case, my dear elf lord takes out a hook, thus discovering an entrance that was above. But, of course, that asshole Fabian, after he doesn't help Cassie, falls from there, and so that he doesn't hit the floor, not only does the elf have to help him, but also the son of a mother, Fabian, makes the hook fall. I mean, because of that stupid thing, the elf lost like $100. After that, they come across a path that seemed to have no end, or at least it was quite far away. In those, Fabian planned to go through it, but again the elf has to carry the game, because if we simply trust Fabian, we won't finish. So the bad magnifying glass of truth is taken out to find the right path. After that, he takes a couple of bombs out of his Goron bag and, well, Fabian gives them to him so he can throw them at the wall so he doesn't feel as useless as he is. After that, they arrive at the ice cavern, but since apart from being a tremendous winner, the elf was also Link's grandson, his grandfather had already told him how to solve the ice cavern puzzle. You know, like when he had to go rescue the cell, which is why the elf solves it, and that opens a secret door. And that's how Fabian, and even throwing his equipment at him, the elf manages to get to the shiny drops. But since there are no limits to being useless, Fabian goes there to grab the drops when the elf stops him and tells him to endure the trip if he doesn't want to end up like a KFC chicken. But this man has a fuss and goes in to grab the drops. And, curiously, it works, so, yoo-hoo, the first thing, well, that Fabian does during this entire trip. But, even so, I haven't forgotten the wide Baracco. That costs like $100 and this asshole threw it away. Meanwhile, in the capital, they were already tired of using so much power from the progenitor rune, but it still ends up being a protective barrier that covers the entire city along with one of their magicians, which is not the definitive solution, but it will give them some time while they think about what the hell to do. But of course, the Iris couldn't take it anymore, so he ended up fainting, so they took him to his room to rest for a while. But right there, Fabian appears with the shiny drops. There, the gem gives them to Iris, and it seems that these drops worked, since at night Iris was already looking better, praying to the rune. But of course, she still had no idea what to do. Of course, I knew two things. First, that he wanted to have a life with the protagonist, and second, that the kingdoms lived in peace, and that the people of both countries were happy. But, as you can imagine, at this point those two things are quite difficult to achieve, if not impossible. After that, she meets Fabian, thanks him for what he did for her, and then she goes to her 4th year to continue living. That things the next day are going to get ugly, no, horrible. And the next day, the protagonist wakes up and sees some magical ships, of course. When he sees this, the protagonist gets ready and leaves the street to see what was happening, and it turns out that those lots of magical boats were heading to the Kingdom of Light, since the King of Darkness decided that that day he would use all his military muscle to have the last battle against the Kingdom of Light, defeat them, and thus, for once and for all, not only take over the Kingdom of Light, but also the Progenitor Rune. And there, while the protagonist was talking with a shopkeeper and some children who were there, a soldier arrives who tells the protagonist to accompany him since it was an order from the king, and, well, the protagonist had to obey. Of course, something to mention is that for this offensive that he launches against the Kingdom of Light, not only does he not have the support of the protagonist for obvious reasons, but he also does not have the support of the gang. But, well, returning with the protagonist and the soldiers, they escort and protect the protagonist so that he could grab the teleportation that took him to the outskirts of the palace of the King of Darkness, who had summoned him. But what the hell, that was just a tall tale. And it turns out that on the outskirts of the palace there was nothing more, nothing less, nothing more, nothing less, nothing more, nothing less, nothing more, nothing less, nothing more, nothing more, nothing less, nothing more than fucking Adele. Because yes, it turns out that his mother's son didn't really die, he was just partying, which doesn't really make much noise to the reader since, to be honest, Adele had died too easily. That is, it wasn't even butter for him to allow himself to be cut that easily. But, well, there these two begin to talk, and in those, the Hoddle tells the reader that he is equal to the current King of Darkness, that is, a son of his mother, his father, grandson of his grandmother and grandfather, who simply wants to see the world burn. The king knew this, and it is for that reason that he gave the order to give Laris a visa to the afterlife. But it turns out that the king did not give that order to Adele thinking that he was capable of doing it, since, although weak, Laris is still the Queen of Light, so the idea that the king had was exactly what happened, that the protagonist gave floor to his so that Iris would be in a state of shock and begin to have doubts about the Kingdom of Darkness and its people. You know, wondering if they're all bad, if you should trust any of them, and things like that. The king knew that this would morally destabilize the Iris, but in addition to that, he also began to launch heavier attacks to force the Iris to use the power of the Progenitor Rune so that its body would become weaker and weaker, and in a prolonged manner. The thing is that both the King of Darkness and Iris have equivalent power, but thanks to the king's plan, Iris was, at least for the moment, mentally and physically weaker than him, and that is why that same day he launched his maximum offensive to take advantage of Iris's weakness before she recovered. With the Iris issue under control, the king thought that the only reasons why his plan could fail were the Grossa and the Hector, since their two could join the side of the Kingdom of Light and sabotage from within. With Grossa, the issue was easy, I simply had to leave him in the Kingdom of Darkness and that's it. But with the protagonist, it was a little more difficult, and that is why the king gives demonic power to Adele and orders him to kill the protagonist. But there the protagonist responds to Adele, "Does it seem to you that I am one-armed, or how is it?" Which is why those two start fighting. And seeing that this time it couldn't be as easy as the last time, the reader releases his demonic power as well, but the reader also ends up feeling naive, which gives Aladel a little advantage to surprise him, screw him, and at a certain point he disarms him and puts his entire sword in him. But there the protagonist also takes advantage and puts his other entire sword into Adele. And that's how Adele ends up winning. And you may wonder, the protagonist is quite injured, but so is Adele. I mean, in what world would this be a gain for Adele? In any case, it would be a tie, but that is where the King of Darkness's plan comes into play, since, at that point, Adele confesses to Hector why the king wanted the Progenitor Rune. One would think that to conquer the entire world and cover it with its darkness, and that is somewhat right, but that is not the whole reason. And, although the king wants to spread his darkness throughout both kingdoms, he does not want to control everything, no. And there is a fundamental reason why the Kingdom of Light and the Kingdom of Darkness have coexisted for millennia, and that reason was balance. For both kingdoms to exist, they needed both light and darkness. But if the king manages to get hold of the Progenitor Rune and using it covers absolutely everything under his darkness, he would break that balance and, consequently, both kingdoms would collapse and be completely destroyed with all their inhabitants. Basically, it's not that the king wants to see the world burn, it's that the bastard directly wants there to be no world. The issue is that the reason Adele was there is not to kill the protagonist. Let's see, if he were to kill him, it would be a pain, but the truth is that the only thing he has to do is make him waste as much time as possible, which he has already achieved, which is why Adele proceeds to die. Already knowing that, the protagonist returns through the teleport to try to go to the Kingdom of Light, but of course that was not going to be so easy, since there were a lot of magical beasts right there, which were out of control and began to attack him. The good thing is that just in those, the big one arrives, who does the second thing so that he does not entertain himself with the beasts, and rather find a way to reach the Kingdom of Light to help Iris, which was quite difficult since there was no magical vessel, but right in those, I don't know if thanks to the power of the progenitor rune. I assume this more than anything because the little power was, obviously, one light and not darkness, but I don't know that this power came from the progenitor rune. The issue is that the power they gave the protagonist seemed like a Red Bull, because it literally gave him wings, with which this man says, "Let's go to the Kingdom of Light." But before continuing with the protagonist, we have to know what happened during all this time in the Kingdom of Light. And, well, the situation is so bad that even Gema and Fabian force Theo to evacuate as soon as possible. And where? You may ask yourself, and the answer is that not even they themselves know. These people just hope that, by sheer luck, Theo will find some safe place to hide until the situation improves. Yes, things were that bad. The good thing is that it seems that Alaris was feeling better thanks to the bright drops, but even so, there were too many troops for the Dark King. Literally, there were 1,000 magical beasts and warriors. They did what they could, but it wasn't enough. And the thing wasn't just that the Dark King had 1,000 troops, which he did, but he also had the power to infect people of light with his darkness, forcing them to fight their own kind. Basically the same he did to those peasants when the Kingdom of Light was attacked by that furry maniac. But that's not all. Valis was also a servant of the Dark King, and while not on the king's level, he's stupidly strong. The only one who could realistically hold a one-on-one fight against Valis, or Iris, who could easily take him down, was Fabian. And note, emphasis on hold, not win, because even if Valis didn't kill him instantly, the power difference was heavily in Valis's favor. But as if that situation wasn't bad enough, there was the icing on the cake. Iris couldn't help much with all that chaos because the evil Dark King was also there. This bastard didn't mess around. Upon reaching the Kingdom of Light, he immediately activated his domain expansion. Iris, knowing how stupidly strong the Dark King is, had no choice but to enter his domain. Once inside, without a word, the magic beatdowns began. Then the Queen says, "What about me? Am I just a mother?" So she also expands her domain. They start fighting while the king messes with her head, saying light will never defeat darkness, that while she's there, her people will die, and he'll spread his darkness everywhere. The Dark King's tactic works well, as Iris takes a huge hit and does the Nabi falling from Avatar 1. Iris uses this to reach Gema, who was almost out of mages and on the verge of madness. Iris tells Gema the situation is bad, but there's still a way to fix everything, using a special spell to change destiny. But Iris can't do it alone, so she asks Gema and her remaining mages for help. They cast the spell, and the worst happens. Nothing changes, which means only one thing. The destruction of the Kingdom of Light by the Dark King was inevitable. And of course, everyone's spirits sank. But there was still a way for the Dark King not to get the progenitor rune. Iris wanted to avoid that option at all costs. But Gema tells her not to be silly. They don't have time. Go do what you have to, while I buy all the time I can. And so Iris had no choice but to go to the progenitor rune. You might ask, what will Iris do with it so the Dark King doesn't get it? Well, the answer is simple. The Dark King can't get the progenitor rune if there is no progenitor rune. Basically, she wants to put that crystal to sleep, and it seems a magical entity, I don't know who, didn't want that. This entity gave the protagonist a wing power-up to reach Iris fast, but he arrives too late. When he arrives, Iris had already asked the progenitor rune to become a main nuclear bomb, destroying the entire Kingdom of Light and, presumably, much of the Kingdom of Darkness. Seeing this, the protagonist gets furious, so he goes after the Dark King, mainly so he'd also take the magical hit and die, making Iris's sacrifice not in vain. After that, Iris seems to reincarnate as a cat, and the protagonist now has all his hair dyed red. He wakes up, by the way, in what seems to be, I don't know, a new continent with cat version Iris. And finally, Fabian is shown in a limbo, going crazy because Iris decided to screw everything up without waiting for him. Well, that's the most anticlimactic ending I've seen in a fantasy magic anime. It's clear this thing needed a second season. This was a 24-episode anime, not a 12-episode one. I mean, watching this ending feels like the second Spider-Man movie, the Miles Morales one. That feels like a 2-hour trailer. It's anticlimactic. It feels like, damn, this is the prologue. The series is supposed to start here, but you cut it right here. I didn't like it for that. It has a bad pace. It ends very badly. This was clearly a 24-episode anime, not a 12-episode one, and that really works against it. Anyway, if you like what I do, like the video, subscribe, and if you write the word, I'll give you a heart, presumably. That's all, I'm Grezimov, and thanks for watching. Goodbye.